All empires fall, all republics transform, and each time it catches the populace by surprise. On January 10th, 49 BC, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. This was a stream in North Italy, and his crossing it with his troops at his back signaled the beginning of the Roman Civil War, which brought about the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of empire. And I believe we're going to see a similar event happen in America soon. Let's dive into it. A lot of people are somewhat familiar with Julius Caesar and Rome today, especially if you're a man on TikTok. You seem to have a couple thoughts of him every week. Caesar is remembered as a great military strategist, a revolutionary leader, a despot, a bloody tyrant. He was remembered in many ways. But who was he, and why is he relevant to the political struggles happening in America right now? I think Julius Caesar matters because he represents an archetype that is produced when a nation, and especially a republic, is on the decline. The Caesar figure is a populist leader, someone who is loved and united with the people in opposition to the corrupt ruling elites and status quo institutions. The importance of this type of figure will become more clear in the second part of this video, but it matters to us today because I think we're going to see the rise of a new Julius Caesar of sorts. You see, the similarities between ancient Rome, the end of the Roman Republic, and America today is astonishing. Of course, America was primarily modeled based off the Roman Republic, the most successful republic hitherto. From it, we derive the Senate, the checks and balances, and also the arc of American progress from its founding to its prosperity to its decline mirrors that of Rome. We'll get into a few more details soon to come, but ultimately, America today stands as the oldest and longest lived republic in world history ever. If I told you that right over there is the oldest man alive, what would your first thought be? Wow. What would your second thought be? The end is near. And the thing is with people as with nations, often because our society is so large we don't really understand history anymore, we have a hard time seeing ourselves. And that's where a figure like Peter Turchin steps in. The history of nations occurs in recognizable cycles. Just like the stock market has a cycle, the seasons have a cycle, your emotions have a cycle, your life has a cycle, so do empires. And at different points in the life cycle of a nation, there are different problems and different types of political leaders that rise to power. In this video, I want to talk about the factors that allowed for the rise of Julius Caesar in Rome and how those factors are replicated in the American Republic today. As Peter Turchin said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. And you don't have to take my word on all this. I'll first dive into Peter Turchin's work and help us gain a more historical and mathematical sense for the rise and fall of empires. And then I want to talk about the figure of Caesar and what he represents, namely a counter-elite who is united with the populace against the ruling class. People like Trump, and specifically RFK Jr., are beginning to step into those Caesar-like shoes, and I believe we're seeing just the first wave of a new counter-elite leadership. So, Peter Turchin is an interesting figure right now. I'm really surprised not more people are talking about. I'm not going to give an in-depth historical analysis of Rome, of Caesar, or even of Turchin, but I'm going to hit on some points that I find most pertinent today. Peter Turchin was an ecologist studying population dynamics in nature with animals. And once computers entered that field, he started playing with complexity mathematics in these large amounts of data put into these databases to observe patterns in populations. After he got bored of ecology, he went over to history, which he deemed not a true science yet. And history was not a true science yet because it had yet to apply mathematics and the scientific method to its study. So what he did is brought the same complexity, economics, or mathematics into history and began building these large-scale models that measured the rise and fall of empires based on a few key indicators. So Turchin made a variety of discoveries. One being that the empire cycle, the life cycle of a nation, is generally 200 to 300 years. Almost every empire or nation, from France to Great Britain to Rome, to China, the life cycle is about 100 years of integration or growth, and then another 100 years of disintegration or decay. And at the end of that, there's generally revolution, civil war, collapse, or calamity of some kind as the cycle repeats or ends. And Rome went through 3 such life cycles of a nation. Right now, America is definitely in a period of decay. It's been a disintegrative phase for a long time, and it's entering this point where great change is coming. And the crazy thing is that in history, great changes, revolutions, civil wars, they all they surprise everyone, and they surprise the elites most of all, which is very interesting. The factors that lead to such political instability, there's 2 main factors that Turchin identified. The first one and the main one is elite overproduction, which we're going to talk about. The second one is oversupply of labor and popular immiseration, meaning that there's too much foreign immigration, or there's too much AI, or there's too many slaves brought into a prosperous nation, or there's population growth in that nation, and therefore there's excessive labor. So the cost of labor goes down, the middle class collapses, and a wealth pump gets turned on, which creates more and more very wealthy elite people and a high class of disenfranchised renters society people who, can't get a job, or they can't really move up in the ranks. When Caesar rose to power in Rome, there was massive and growing wealth inequality. These aristocrats who were winning wars, these foreign wars, were bringing back slaves, and there was massive immigration, aka cheap labor. And this was creating these huge conglomerate farms that were outcompeting the small farmers and buying up the surrounding areas. And then the citizens of Rome, the middle class of Rome, the backbone of it, was slowly falling away. And these soldiers, these farmers, lost what they worked for and then had to move into cities. And there was this popular immiseration. The Roman dream was dead. All of a sudden, the citizens no longer trusted the Roman government. They were forced out of their homes. They didn't believe or have hope for the future. There was fewer and fewer prospects available to them. On top of that, there was elite overproduction, meaning there was more and more 0.1% people at the top who were competing for a limited amount of power. And this created a lot of factions and infighting, which we see in America today in almost every way. Walk in figures like Trump, like Julius Caesar, and you get the picture. And essentially what happens here is you get this counter elite who is against the ruling classes, who is against the status quo, and they unite and mobilize the masses of disenfranchised and frustrated people who have lost faith in the ruling institutions. And this is the recipe for revolution. This is the recipe for a rise of Caesar or Trump or RFK or some new counter elite. So our elites in America today are not conquering new lands and bringing back slaves to replace the middle class, but there is enormous and unprecedented immigration into all European countries and America. And on top of that, AI is replacing even white-collar jobs like computer programmers. So there's this overproduction of cheap labor right now. And on top of that, since the 1970s, the wealth pump has been turned on, as Peter Turchin talks about. I don't have time to go into all the stats and details here. I highly encourage you to read his book. Real wages since the 1970s have stagnated, while worker production has increased. We see this in the cost of living or trying to buy a house. Like, most people in my generation will never be able to buy a family home today because 30 minutes outside of Denver, they're $1 million. And so there's this decline in opportunity. Like, our generation is much worse off than our parents. Some say we have 96% less purchasing power, which is ridiculous. Inflation and all these things have ruined the middle class of America. There really isn't a middle class anymore. There's just poor people, and then there's these ultra rich. It's kind of like the stimulus checks during the pandemic. The government sent out these stimulus checks to stimulate the economy and put money into poor people's pockets. But what really happened is everyone took those checks and went and bought shit on Amazon, and all the money flowed upward. It didn't flow to mom and pop shops. It flowed into Jeff Bezos' wallet. So all of a sudden, the pandemic created all of these new billionaires, while the real wages of the working populace stagnated or decreased. Turchin would call our civilization top-heavy, and this is no secret. The 100-millionaire class and the billionaire class are growing, and so is the lower class. The middle class is emptying out. To make matters worse, people my age, especially young men, they're not in relationships. They have few economic prospects. They're graduating with advanced degrees with no job opportunities that are really exciting to them. They have no unifying purpose, no religious gathering spaces, no community, nothing really left to live for. And a lot of them are frustrated. They may not call themselves revolutionary, but then a figure like Trump comes along and they're all gung-ho for him. And that's the thing, is we have this class of people who aren't a citizen of the larger whole anymore. They're no longer American citizens. Just like the Roman legionnaires were no longer truly Roman citizens once they lost their farms. And because of all of this frustration, this popular immiseration, there is this large populist people who don't trust the government. They don't trust Rome, for instance, right? They don't trust America. They don't trust the oligarchs. They don't trust big tech. They don't trust big pharma. They don't trust big ag. They don't trust Jeff Bezos. They don't trust the ruling elite. There's this huge movement everywhere in the world, but especially concentrated in America, of massive distrust and frustration with the status quo. Enter in Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar entered into this Roman popular immiseration and elite overproduction, right? And he was like, you know what? I'm going to be a counter-elite. And a counter-elite is someone from an elite family who goes against the status quo, right? He goes against the ruling aristocracy, per se. And he unites himself with the popularis, with the populace. And this is what a populist leader is a counter-elite generally united with the people against the nobility. And a lot of people think of a Caesar type as someone who's a tyrant, but in all actuality, Caesars come along when the ruling elite class becomes too corrupt, because all of a sudden the people get angry, and what the people need, you can't really have a slave revolution. Slave revolution, peasant revolution, lower class revolutions rarely work. They only work if there is an elite ruling them or leading them, like the tip of the spear. And that's what a counter-elite does, is they mobilize the masses. And we are seeing this with figures like Trump today, and especially in my eyes with RFK Jr. RFK Jr. came from an elite ruling family, the dynasty of the Kennedys, right? But now he is in total opposition to big pharma, to big tech, to big ag, to big war, to big government, to all of it. And he is public enemy number one because of it. And this is just like Julius Caesar. The funny thing is before Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, which, basically declared civil war in Rome, because the Roman Senate asked Julius Caesar, hey, you got to abandon your troops. You got to cancel your post. They were trying to cancel him. And Julius Caesar feared for his own life and safety because he was being canceled essentially by the Senate. The same thing had happened with RFK Jr. is he's requested Secret Service protection over and over again. His uncle and his grandfather were both assassinated, right? And still the government won't give him Secret Service protection for the first time in history to a presidential candidate who has, this X amount of following. And it's very interesting is he's canceled by media, he's canceled by Hollywood, he's canceled by the press, he's canceled by the big government, he's canceled by everyone, he's even canceled by the Secret Service. He's just like Julius Caesar. And he has this following that's not quite as fanatical or warlike as Caesar, but is nonetheless very frustrated and very mistrusting of the government. This was all just my 2 cents, guys. Thanks for watching. I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Is RFK Jr., is Trump, is someone else the next Caesar? Thanks for being here. This is Wisdom Warriors. If you want to talk to me one-on-one, you can apply for a discovery call. Link in the description below. And if you want to learn more about this topic, I encourage you to watch this video about frontiers and why America is collapsing. Thanks for being here. Peace.